In an emotional moment that shook the nation, Donald Trump Jr. led a heartfelt prayer honoring his close friend Charlie Kirk, who was tragically assassinated during a campus event in Utah. With millions watching, Trump Jr.'s words brought America to tears as he remembered Kirk's fight for conservative values and freedom. This powerful tribute is one of the most moving moments in recent U.S. history, leaving viewers across the nation grieving and united in sorrow. The campus of Utah Valley University had been buzzing with excitement on that fateful afternoon. Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist who had inspired millions of young Americans, was on stage answering tough questions with his usual calmness and conviction. Then, in one shattering instant, everything changed forever. A sudden crack split the air, echoing through the packed auditorium. Students screamed in terror as the horrifying reality dawned on them. Security personnel rushed forward toward the stage where Kirk had been speaking. Within seconds, chaos erupted throughout the venue as panic spread like wildfire. Charlie collapsed on the stage, his hand clutching his chest as crimson spread across his shirt. The crowd scattered in terror, the sound of running feet echoing in the arena as people fled for safety. The shooter slipped away into the gathering darkness, leaving behind devastation and unanswered questions that would haunt a nation. News alerts flashed across phones within minutes, delivering the unthinkable headline to millions of Americans. Charlie Kirk, shot at Utah Valley University, read the notification that would stop hearts nationwide. Across America, living rooms filled with stunned silence and disbelief as the news spread. Tears streamed down faces as people realized what had just happened to the young conservative leader. Social media exploded with expressions of sorrow and anger at the senseless violence. In Washington, Donald Trump Jr. was pulled aside from a meeting in the West Wing by a solemn-faced aide. He froze as he read the incoming message on his phone, unable to process the words before him. His hands trembled visibly as the reality sank, and his closest friend, more like a brother than a colleague, had been taken by an act of pure evil. In that moment, Don Jr.'s world cracked open before him, and America braced for what would become the most painful prayer it would ever witness. Sirens wailed across Utah as federal agents swarmed the university campus in force. The shooter had vanished, but the hunt was only beginning as law enforcement mobilized at unprecedented speed. Helicopters hovered overhead, powerful searchlights sweeping across rooftops and parking structures. Students wept in the parking lot, some clutching each other for support, others frantically calling parents to assure them of their safety. Charlie's voice, the one that had once calmed, challenged, and inspired millions, was now silenced forever. President Donald Trump, visibly shaken and furious, addressed the nation from the Oval Office within hours of the shooting. This cowardly attack on Charlie Kirk was not just an attack on a man, the president declared solemnly. It was an attack on America's soul, on our fundamental freedoms, on our very way of life. We will find the perpetrator of this heinous act, he promised the nation. Justice will be swift and justice will be unforgiving for this attack on our democracy. But even as the president's words rang across the airwaves, it was Donald Trump Jr. whom Americans waited anxiously to hear from. Everyone knew how incredibly close he and Charlie had been throughout the years of building the conservative movement. Everyone waited for Trump Jr.'s voice, his prayer, his tribute to the friend who had stood beside him through countless battles. Don Jr. sat alone in his office, head bowed low under the weight of grief too heavy to bear. Reporters gathered outside, waiting respectfully for any statement from the man who had lost his dearest friend. His staff whispered that the cameras were ready whenever he felt able to speak. But Don Jr. wasn't thinking about cameras or public statements in that moment of raw grief. He was thinking about the last hug Charlie had given him just 3 days earlier at a campaign event in Michigan. He was remembering the last time Charlie had said, "I'm praying for you, brother," before boarding his flight to Utah. Now, it was Don Jr. who needed to pray for his fallen friend before a watching nation. The White House press briefing room was eerily silent as journalists awaited his arrival. It wasn't the usual restless silence filled with whispered conversations and shuffling papers. This was a heavy silence like the air before a devastating storm breaks over vulnerable land. Donald Trump Jr. walked in slowly, his face pale and drawn, his eyes visibly red from tears he had shed in private. The cameras clicked softly, but no reporter spoke a single question as he approached the podium. Even the journalists, so often sharp and combative in their questioning, were subdued by the palpable grief filling the room. He placed his hands on the podium, gripping it tightly as though steadying himself against a powerful wave of emotion. He paused, gathering whatever strength remained within him for the words that must be spoken. For a long moment, he couldn't speak at all, the silence stretching out as America held its collective breath. Then, with a trembling voice that betrayed his shattered heart, he began the address that would unite a divided nation in grief. "The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk is nothing short of evil incarnate," he began, his voice breaking on the words. "A cowardly attack on America's very soul has taken from us one of our brightest lights." His voice cracked with emotion, but he pressed on, his words heavy with the grief of personal loss. Charlie was a Christian who had accepted Jesus as his Savior and lived that faith every day of his life. Tonight we know the Lord is greeting him, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master." Some in the press room wept openly at the raw emotion in Trump Jr.'s voice. Others bowed their heads in respect for the fallen conservative leader. Across the country, millions of Americans watched as Donald Trump Jr. struggled through his tears to honor his friend. And in that moment, it felt as if the entire nation had gathered for a prayer that would echo through history forever. Phones across the nation buzzed nonstop as people shared the live broadcast with loved ones. Every television channel cut to live coverage of the extraordinary moment unfolding in Washington. News anchors spoke with trembling voices, trying to contextualize what had happened in Utah while respecting the gravity of the moment. Students who had been inside the hall gave emotional interviews through tears, their voices shaking as they described the chaos that had erupted. He was just talking about faith and freedom. One young woman whispered her mascara streaked down her face from crying. And then the shot rang out so suddenly. I still hear it in my head when I close my eyes. America felt paralyzed by the shocking assassination of such a prominent young leader. Churches opened their doors for impromptu prayer services across the country. Families sat quietly around dinner tables, struggling to find words adequate for the moment. People who had never met Charlie Kirk personally found themselves weeping, feeling as if they had lost a member of their own family. Meanwhile, Donald Trump Jr. prepared himself to continue speaking, drawing on inner reserves of strength. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages of condolence from supporters, fellow politicians, and ordinary Americans reaching out. But he didn't look at the screen, couldn't bear to see the flood of grief pouring in from across the nation. Instead, he sat in silence during a brief pause, staring at a single photo of him and Charlie laughing together backstage at a Turning Point USA event just weeks earlier. The weight on his shoulders grew heavier with each passing moment as the nation looked to him for comfort. Soon, he would have to lift America with words that could barely escape his own broken heart. As Don Jr. composed himself at the podium, his mind drifted back to the first time Charlie had reached out to him years earlier. It was 2015, during the early days of his father's presidential campaign, when most established Republicans had kept their distance. He remembered how a simple Twitter message from the young activists, just a few words of encouragement during a difficult news cycle, had marked the beginning of their brotherhood. Charlie wasn't just a political ally to Don Jr. throughout the years that followed. He was a mentor in connecting with young conservatives, a listener during personal struggles, and at times even a spiritual guide. When Don Jr. faced his toughest public criticism, Charlie had been the first person to call and pray with him over the phone. He had believed in the Trump family's mission long before it was politically expedient to do so. Now that loyal voice of encouragement was gone forever, silenced by a bullet fired in hatred. "How do I do this without you, brother?" Don Jr. whispered quietly to himself at the podium. His staff looked on, unsure of what to say to comfort him in this darkest of moments. They had never seen the normally confident Trump's son so vulnerable, so utterly human in his grief. Across social media, Americans began posting their own memories and encounters with the fallen conservative leader. Old photos from Turning Point USA events filled timelines as people shared how Kirk had touched their lives. Young people shared how Charlie had inspired them to stand tall in hostile college classrooms to defend their beliefs without fear of ridicule. Grief was everywhere, flowing across political boundaries that had seemed impenetrable just hours earlier. Yet, alongside the grief, something unexpected was emerging. Unity in a nation long divided by bitter partisanship. For the first time in years, America wasn't split down the middle by political hatred and scorn. It was joined together in tears for a young life cut tragically short before its full potential could be realized. The briefing room phone rang unexpectedly, breaking the solemn silence. Don Jr. answered with a hoarse, "Hello," his voice rough from emotion. On the other end was President Trump, his father, calling from the Oval Office. His voice was heavy, slower than usual, weighed down with shared grief for the young man they had both admired. "Don," the president said softly, uncharacteristically gentle. "I know he was like a brother to you all these years." Don Jr. closed his eyes tightly, fighting back a fresh wave of tears at his father's words. "Yes, sir," he managed to respond. "He was the brother I chose, the one who stood with us when others wouldn't." There was a poignant pause on the line between father and son, united in grief. Then President Trump continued, his voice carrying both sorrow and resolve. "Charlie really loved his family so much. He was so proud of Erica and their children. I saw it every time he visited the White House. This loss is beyond words, beyond politics. But we cannot let it be in vain, son. You and we must carry his fight forward for the country he loved so deeply." Don Jr. nodded silently, gripping the phone tighter as he absorbed his father's words. The president's challenge echoed in his chest, cutting through the fog of grief with purpose. Minutes later, the White House press team announced that Donald Trump Jr. would lead the nation in prayer for Charlie Kirk. Later that evening, millions were already tuning in across America, waiting, grieving, hoping for words that might help bind the country's wounds. As Don Jr. prepared to address the nation again, he whispered under his breath, "Charlie, help me find the words. I need your strength tonight, brother." The stage was set for a moment that would transcend ordinary politics in extraordinary ways. The nation held its collective breath for the prayer about to be offered by a man known more for political fights than public vulnerability. By evening, every news network had turned its cameras toward Washington in anticipation. From New York to Los Angeles, from small-town diners to college dormitories, people were glued to their screens and shared national grief. Even busy airports had fallen unusually quiet as travelers stopped to watch the broadcast on terminal televisions. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram were flooded, with posts bearing Charlie Kirk's photo and expressions of shock and sorrow. Some carried Bible verses offering comfort for such a time of national mourning. Others shared raw grief in simple, heartfelt words that needed no embellishment. Thousands posted the same simple message across platforms. Pray for Erica. Pray for the Kirk children. Don Jr. understood profoundly the weight of responsibility that had fallen upon his shoulders in this moment. His words would not just be for himself, not just for Charlie's immediate family, but for the soul of a wounded nation seeking healing. His wife entered his office quietly before the broadcast, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder in silent support. "You can do this," she whispered, her eyes reflecting his pain. "You're speaking for all of us tonight." He nodded in acknowledgement, but his eyes betrayed the emotional storm raging inside him. He whispered under his breath, "Lord, give me strength to honor my friend properly before this nation." And somewhere in that silent moment of prayer, America held its breath with him, waiting for whatever would come next. Donald Trump Jr. stepped out from his office, surrounded by solemn Secret Service agents who shared in the national grief. The hallways of the White House, usually buzzing with staff and activity, had fallen uncharacteristically silent out of respect. White House staffers stood against the walls with re-ened eyes, some whispering prayers of their own for the slain conservative leader. As Don Jr. walked toward the briefing room, every step felt heavier than the last, weighted with the responsibility of the moment. He could hear the muffled sound of reporters beyond the doors, the low hum of cameras waiting to capture what would become a historic address. He carried no prepared notes or teleprompter text for this most personal of moments. He had decided that every word tonight would come straight from his heart, unfiltered and authentic in his grief. At the doorway, he paused momentarily, gripping the frame for balance as emotions threatened to overwhelm him again. Images of Charlie flashed through his mind in rapid succession, laughing backstage at events, speaking passionately to crowds, showing pictures of his children with pride. The weight of those memories nearly broke his composure completely, but somehow he steadied himself for the nation's sake. When the doors opened and he entered the room, a profound silence fell over the assembled press corps. Reporters lowered their heads respectfully, sensing the gravity of what they were about to witness. Millions watching at home and around the world leaned closer to their screens, but the silence was so thick it seemed the entire world had stopped spinning to listen. Donald Trump Jr. stepped up to the podium with measured steps, his grief evident in every movement. His voice trembled noticeably as he began to speak again to the American people. Don Jr. took a deep breath, his hands tightening visibly on the edges of the podium as he looked straight into the cameras. His lips parted, but for a long moment no sound came as emotion threatened to overwhelm him completely. Finally, his voice, raw and heavy with unfiltered emotion, broke the silence that had fallen over the room. The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk is nothing short of evil unleashed upon our nation. He began, each word cutting through the stillness. A cowardly attack on America's very soul has robbed us of a true patriot in his prime. The words cut through the air like a knife, reaching into homes across the divided nation. His voice cracked with emotion, but he pressed on despite the pain evident in every syllable. Faith, family, freedom, the right to speak truth without fear. These principles have been trampled by violence today. My blood boils at this attack on a peaceful voice for conservative values. Justice must be relentless and unforgiving for the person who committed this heinous act. He paused briefly, his chest rising and falling as he fought back a fresh wave of tears before continuing. Charlie Kirk was a Christian who accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior and lived to that faith authentically every day. Tonight, I know with absolute certainty that the Lord is greeting him, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Across living rooms and churches throughout America, people wept openly at the raw display of grief. Pastors and evening services replayed Don Jr.'s words for congregations gathered in impromptu prayer circles. Families watching together bowed their heads in silent respect, regardless of political affiliation. Don Jr.'s personal grief became the nation's shared grief in that powerful moment of human connection. His voice carried not just sorrow for a fallen friend, but a fierce promise that such an attack on free speech would not stand. Charlie Kirk's fight for truth and freedom would not die with him, but would be carried forward by countless inspired by his example. As Trump Jr.'s heartfelt words echoed across America, living rooms fell silent in shared mourning. People sat frozen before their screens, clinging to every syllable of comfort offered. Some bowed their heads in prayer for the Kirk family's unimaginable loss. Others wiped away unexpected tears, surprised by the depth of emotion they felt for someone many had only seen on television. In small-town churches across rural America, pastors replayed the memorial address through speakers for evening prayer services. In college dormitories, students who had once debated Kirk's ideas vigorously now whispered in disbelief that his voice had been permanently silenced. Don Jr.'s trembling words reached across the political divides that had seemed so insurmountable just days before. For one extraordinary night, Americans of all political persuasions felt the same wound to their national soul. It wasn't just about politics anymore in the face of such senseless violence. It was about the loss of a husband, a father, a son, a friend, a man who had dared to live with conviction, regardless of criticism. On social media, the hashtag #pray for Charlie Kirk shot to the top of trending lists worldwide. Strangers shared their grief as though they had lost someone from their own inner circle of loved ones. "I never met him," one woman posted with heartbreaking simplicity. "But tonight, I feel like I've lost my own brother." Inside, of smear campaign throughout her political career. From her secure White House office safe, Caroline retrieved a file she had preserved since 2009. The documents detailed Schwarzenegger's cancellation of crucial veteran job training programs during his governorship. Internal emails revealed the decision was made to avoid association with conservative organizations, not budget constraints as publicly claimed. Schwarzenegger didn't just mock us, Caroline told her assembled media team, her voice sharp with purpose. He betrayed the very people he now claims to champion. Caroline chose Tucker Carlson's prime time show to unveil the explosive documents. In the brightly lit Fox News studio, she sat upright in her Navy power suit, her gaze unwavering and determined. "Mr. Schwarzenegger calls my husband and me defamers," Caroline began, her voice calm, but cutting through the tension. "But here's the documented truth about his real record with veterans." She held up the file, the camera zooming in on highlighted emails with Schwarzenegger's signature clearly visible. In 2009, he personally can-led veteran support programs because they didn't fit his political image. This isn't speculation or hearsay. This is his signature, his decision, his betrayal of the heroes he now pretends to support. The studio audience erupted in shocked applause, many standing to show their support. Tucker Carlson, rarely at a loss for words, nodded with genuine approval. "You just dropped a nuclear bomb on his credibility," he said, his eyes reflecting the gravity of the revelation. The avalanche of support. The interview went viral instantly, reaching millions of viewers within the first hour. Social media platforms exploded with posts sharing screenshots of the damning documents. A veteran posted, "I was in that 2009 program that Schwarzenegger destroyed." Caroline Leavitt is telling the absolute truth about his betrayal. Another user wrote, "Arnold thinks he can sue Caroline into silence. She just exposed him as a complete hypocrite and liar." A viral meme appeared pairing Schwarzenegger's image with the caption, "I'll be back, but not for the veterans I abandoned." The public reaction created a tsunami of support for Caroline and Nicholas. Veterans organizations from the VFW to the American Legion issued official statements supporting Caroline. They called for Schwarzenegger to publicly apologize for both his gay behavior and his documented betrayal of veterans. Unexpected allies emerge. The story transcended typical political boundaries when unexpected allies began speaking out in Los Angeles. Sylvester Stallone, despite his friendship with Schwarzenegger, posted on social media, "I've known Arnold for decades, but Caroline Leavitt is absolutely right. Veterans deserve respect, not political abandonment. Truth matters more than Hollywood friendships." The post from the Rocky star sent shock waves through both political and entertainment circles. Stallone's massive fan base, spanning action movie enthusiasts to conservatives, shared the post like a battle cry. One user commented, "When Rocky backs the truth tellers, you know Arnold messed up big time." In New York, Megyn Kelly used her podcast to praise Caroline and Nicholas's courage. "I don't agree with every Trump policy," Kelly said with visible emotion. But Caroline Leavitt and her husband did something many people wouldn't dare. They faced down a Hollywood giant and spoke truth to power. The retreat and reckoning. Under mounting pressure from all sides, Schwarzenegger's team advised a strategic retreat. A brief statement appeared on his official social media accounts. No video, no personal appearance, just plain text. "I have always supported our veterans and apologize if any past actions caused misunderstanding. Let's focus on helping our heroes move forward." The statement carefully avoided mentioning Caroline or Nicholas by name or acknowledging the damning 2009 documents, but the public understood it as a complete surrender. Caroline, reading the statement from her White House office, showed no triumph, only focused determination. "He won't go any further," she told her team calmly. "But our work isn't finished." She ordered her media team to amplify the narrative, highlighting continued support from veterans and unexpected allies like Stallone and Kelly. Her official response post read, "Thank you to our veterans, Sylvester Stallone, Megyn Kelly, and everyone who stood up for truth and honor. This victory belongs to those who deserve our respect and support." The confrontation between Caroline Leavitt, Nicholas Riccio, and Arnold Schwarzenegger became more than just a viral moment. It evolved into a powerful symbol of ordinary people standing up against overwhelming power and privilege. News outlets from Fox News to CNN ran extensive coverage of Schwarzenegger's retreat. A CBS commentator observed Caroline Leavitt and Nicholas Riccio accomplished something remarkable. They forced a Hollywood legend to back down using nothing but truth and courage. Independent journalists noted, "This couple didn't just defeat a celebrity. They reminded America that integrity still matters more than fame." Veterans organizations continued showing support, with groups across the country inviting Caroline and Nicholas to speak at upcoming events. A young veteran wrote, "Caroline and Nicholas gave us hope that our voices matter and our sacrifices won't be forgotten." The quiet victory months later, at a sunset ceremony in Richmond, Virginia, hundreds of veterans and their families gathered for a special honoring truth event. Caroline and Nicholas entered to heartfelt embraces and genuine gratitude from people whose lives they had touched. An elderly veteran holding his service beret approached Nicholas with tears in his eyes. "You made us proud when we needed it most," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Nicholas bowed his head respectfully, replying, "We simply did what was right, sir. The honor is ours." Caroline, invited to deliver the keynote address, spoke from her heart to weathered faces of true heroes. "We live in an era where fame often overshadows truth," she said, her voice carrying across the simple community center. "But you've taught us that real honor cannot be bought with lights, cameras, or public attention. Honor comes from standing up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost." Nicholas, listening from the back of the room, felt profound pride watching Caroline inspire these remarkable people. A Marine veteran beside him whispered, "She was born for moments like this. She was born to fight for people like us," Nicholas replied, his voice filled with love and admiration. The story of Caroline Leavitt and Nicholas Riccio's confrontation with Arnold Schwarzenegger became a defining moment in American political and cultural discourse. Their victory,